Bill?
All right, I'm turning it over to Lori and John.
Okay, Lori, if you want to bring up the PowerPoint, I'll just start by saying, welcome everybody. As chair of the finance committee, worked with Lori on this budget and Christy on as input as well. Um, and I just want to make it clear, we're seeing some high level summary information today. Lori has spent hours and hours of time developing all of the detail that that builds up this budget. It's not small. And there's a couple of pretty complicated spreadsheets out there that need to be developed, checked, rechecked, and then finally converted into the summary information you're seeing today. So I just want to stress that there's a lot of information below the surface that you're welcome to have and have a look at, however you want to do that. But I just want to make that invitation and make that known. Why don't you go ahead to the next slide, Lori? We'll look at the agenda today, which we've already satisfied. Number one on the agenda, well, the list of the finance committee there, and the only Tom, we're glad to have Tom as part of the group. By the way, Tom Apps, he's got a long history with Calvary and as treasurer and then senior warden and now finance committee member and other things. So thanks, Tom, for joining the group. Agenda, yeah, well, we've had our opening prayer. I'm going to talk about I'm doing right now, introducing the budget, and touch on the actual results. Lori's going to dig into the detail on both of those items, the actual results for 2022, which then blend over into the 2023 budget. Really focusing on the budget today, but we need to talk about 2022 year end as well. And then I'll do a few wrap up comments, and of course we'll take questions at any time. We do have just some we do have a reference to the investment portfolio in this deck. If Christie's still on by the time we get to that point in the discussion, you're welcome to Christy to jump in and add more texture and detail to what I have in here, if you choose to. If not, we can do that next week at the annual meeting as well. So why don't we go ahead to the next slide, Lori? We are, as you know, emerging from the pandemic. What does that mean? I mean, the pandemic probably will be with us in some form, an endemic for generations to come. But with the COVID variants that will be emerging, we're plagued by variants, as I mentioned, and a little play on words there. But anyway, yeah, we're going to have this. It's going to be around, but we seem to be coming back to a place of normalcy, and not only at Calvary but other places as well in our lives. And if this restarting though is, I think it feels like more of a challenge than I expected it to be. When we closed the church in March of 2020, we all thought, well, a few weeks, a month or two, whatever. Well, it turned into 2 years, roughly, or a year and a half to 2 years, with online streaming and stuff that came into play during the process. But the church really was in a shutdown mode, and that and you just can't turn it back on again. We turned it off pretty quick, but you can't turn it back on nearly as easily as we turned it off. All the programming, all the staffing, the content, and the activities. And we just had a meeting today about education, a brunch today on that, and yeah, it's Michelle's got a big load to carry in terms of getting Sunday school and youth events underway once again, and restarting feels like starting over in some respects, and I guess that's my point there. And it's reflected in the numbers, as you'll see when we get to the numbers. Um, the building is a focus for us. We spend a lot of money on the building. We love the building. It's the National Historical Registry. It's a wonderful facility. A lot of history, but it's expensive, and it just is what it is. For 2022 or 2023, we've got actually for 2022 we've got income under budget, and then expenses under budget even more than income, and we ended the year with essentially a small surplus, and a budgeted deficit of $25,000 that went away by the by God's grace and the generosity of the parishioners. In terms of budget, income is substantially lower than 2022. Particularly, pledge income is lower by a significant amount. We're down 17 pledges, and that could change by the time the annual meeting rolls around. We may have some more, but right now that's a big percentage of pledges, down from something over 100 there, 100 and whatever it was, 12. Non-pledge income is increased, reflecting actual trends. We took it's something of a leap of faith, but actually trends do support increasing non-pledge income now to a higher level. Basically, we're seeing what used to be pledge income being given is non-pledge income in many respects. And we wish it were pledges, because with a pledge, you have some certainty about that income, and you can actually build program and hire staff to support that program when you've got a pledge in hand. When you don't have a pledge in hand, it's still wonderful to receive the support and the giving, but hard to plan. Expenses are up in 2023. We've got staff in place for music and faith formation education. We've got inflationary impacts. Utility rates, for example, are going up quite a bit in 2023. That's built into the budget. That's an example. The deficit is budgeted at $81,643. That's a deficit budget. We are allowed to do that under the financial policy, and the vestry has approved that policy, and we have budgeted deficits for several years recently. We've had many times we've come out with a surplus at the end of the year on actuals, but went into the year with a budgeted deficit. I'm not going to say we're going to be able to alleviate this much of a deficit by year end, but it's possible. God will provide, so we'll see. The new vestry will have to deal with that deficit with potentially additional appeals, the use of contingency funds, and other means potentially. And one thing I've got to say, as a former CFO of a power company, this is not a sustainable deficit for Calvary. Calvary is not big enough to carry this kind of a deficit for very long, and we really need to have a multi-year plan in place, with the goal of alleviating all deficits, hopefully in the future. And I don't know how soon that'll happen. I don't know how many years it'll take. It could be more than just a couple, but we need to have a plan and start working that plan. And as I mentioned, God has provided and will provide. I have faith. I told this finance committee on a call the other night. I've been in financial scrapes before in my life, and God has provided, and it's been alleviated. That doesn't mean we sit around and wait for manna to fall from heaven, or money in this case fall from heaven. We have to take actions and help ourselves. But at least with God in this, and God is in this and leading us, we can turn our focus away from will it ever be fixed, because we know it will. God will fix it with our help, but we can focus on what to do about it instead. So that's I think the direction we'd like to encourage people to go. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori, and she can take us through some of the details.
All right. Thank you, John.
Welcome.
Let's start with looking at the 2022 funds summary. We have two main categories of funds, as you might remember. Starting in the blue section there, our general fund, this is our operating fund, if you will, that is, its income is pledge, non-pledge, plate, building use, that kind of thing. As John mentioned, we had planned to have about a $25,000 deficit. We ended up pretty much breaking even with a small surplus of $597. And that was due largely to kind of, again, some extraordinary giving in the month of December. Usually fourth quarter is pretty good for us. This year we waited all the way till the end and had some extraordinary giving in December. According to our finance policy, that surplus allocation is 80% goes to the trust fund and 20% goes to the mission and outreach fund. We'll get into a little bit more about the actual operations general fund performance in the upcoming slide. Going down to the yellow section, the vestry designated funds. Some of the things to note is that media fund had started out with a small balance, spent the whole thing on the rest of the live stream technical requirements, and it's now depleted. Also to note is the Oasis Garden Fund didn't see much income this year, and my guess is that's because people just aren't using those special offering envelopes like we used to in the past. The Memorial Garden, on the other hand, had several purchases this year, so its fund has increased. The other one to note here is Building Fund. Get quite a bit of expense. We anticipated that, and this is largely made up of the cost of the sidewalk repair, which was done in 2021 but paid for in 2022. An upgrade to our alarm system, and as you know, it's a big expense in putting in the ERV, the air handling systems for the sanctuary and Brackenridge. Music Fund, its income was largely from tribute gifts for Brian Williams. And then the major expense was organ pipe refurbishment. That was actually paid for with a gift that was given in 2021, but the work was done in 2022. Trust fund was largely gained through investment income. Mission and outreach, we received, as did all of the churches in the Diocese of Minnesota, we received $2,000 in a relief fund that they gave back to the churches. And the vestry made a decision to turn that right around and donate it to the landing. So those are our major income and expense note items for our vestry designated funds. According to our financial policy, the finance committee can make a recommendation to the vestry about use of, there's a couple of liability accounts that we can take money from them and use it to beef up, if you will, the vestry designated funds. The finance committee will be meeting to make those recommendations for the vestry to address at its February meeting. Any questions on the funds and funds activity for 2022? All right, going on then, let's take a little deeper dive into the general operating fund. For the visual folks, this is pretty much the picture of what went on. The dotted lines are our plan, our budget. The solid lines are the actual. So if you look at the orange, which is the expenses, we pretty much consistently ran under plan for our expenses. Unfortunately, we also pretty consistently ran under plan for our income until, like I said, the month of December, we took a huge, grateful jump in our both pledge and non-pledge income. Which is what amounted to us being able to break even for the year. The net operating income, we'd planned, like I said, on a deficit of $25,000, and we ended up pretty much breaking even. So for those of you that would rather see the numbers, here we are. The green column is our 2022 budget. The blue column is our actual. The pledge giving was about $15,000 below plan. Plate and other income was about $3,000 below plan. Non-pledge giving as John said, the trend is pledge going down and non-pledge going up. Non-pledge giving was about $15,000 above plan. So we netted out at the end of the year in terms of our income about $9,000 below plan. Our expenses, as we totaled them, are about $34,500 below plan. As John mentioned, it's mostly due to staffing vacancies that we had during the year, some reduced programming because we weren't fully up to speed with our programs, and therefore not the expenses. And we did maintenance and utilities costs were a little bit below what we had anticipated for 2022. Let's see if there are any other things we want to call out here. But again, our net effect here was 500 and this is actually $597. There's a little bit of rounding going on there, but as opposed to our planned deficit of 25,000.
Yes.
Any questions
Lori?
on there or any of these you want to dig into?
This is Dane.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to go up to income for a
Dane.
minute. What is the difference between plate income and non-pledge income?
Plate income is literally what people put in the offering plate each Sunday.
Right.
Non-pledge income is income that comes in that is either given by people who do not commit to a pledge.
Mhm.
That's most of it. Some of it is people who have pledged, but the non-income is what they give above what they had pledged. Does that make sense?
Yes. What is the other income?
Other income will include things like our building use, rental.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right.
There's a
Thank
couple
you.
other things in there that are pretty small though.
All right. So the non-pledge is when people who've already pledged give more.
Or the bulk of it is people who do not commit to a pledge, but they still give to Calvary.
Other than the plate.
No, they have not committed a pledge. They do not sign and return a pledge card.
Okay, I see. All right.
Yeah, there's some
Beth gives Beth and I white hair.
Yeah, because
well, exactly that I was going to say that there's some judgment that has to be made on some of those donations because it may come in the plate, it may show up in the plate as a check made out to the parish, but Phil will make a decision when he records it whether it's a non-pledge item or whether it's a plate income item in some cases. In other cases, it's very obvious. Someone may write a check and mail it to the church and say, this is a donation. I don't have a pledge.
All right.
I want to give this money. So it's obviously a non-pledge income item as opposed to a plate item, but there's a judgment.
What about visitors that come in and, put in a check in the plate?
That would be recorded as plate income.
That'd be plate
okay.
income. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on the 2022 numbers?
I just had a question is, under all the expenses, utilities, education, music, what is church program?
It's a category of a number of things. That's where like fellowship would be, and let me see, fellowship, pastoral care, mission and outreach. There's a number of them that are in about 7 or 8 that are lumped in there, summarized in there.
Yeah. We have all the detail on that. If you're interested in seeing it, we can provide, all the breakdowns of all these categories.
In this particular one, you see that the actual was quite a bit more than we had planned. And again, as I mentioned, some of that was our restart, as John said, of some of our programming. And a lot of that this year was fellowship, who did kind of a wonderful job of getting us all back together again. But those were expenses that hadn't necessarily been in the budget, but the vestry gave them approval to go ahead because of the expense was well worth it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Lori, this is Dane again.
Mhm.
Alter Guild. I see
Yeah.
that we're overspent in last year. And yet it says 39%. Wouldn't that be a minus? I mean, we're negative there.
No, that this column is year to year. It's comparing, I apologize, I put the wrong slide in here. This is comparing the budget to the 23 budget to the 22 budget.
All right, thank you.
Right. But Alter Guild, as you well know, Dane, we had to replace, re-up, whatever, a lot of things that had not been used for the previous 2 years when we weren't worshiping. So our expenses there have gone up. Dane will let you know that those wonderful compostable cups are pretty expensive. So we had expenses there that we hadn't necessarily planned for.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's move on and start looking at 2023. Starting over on the very right-hand part of this slide, I'll talk quickly through the assumptions. Obviously that we're open a full year for normal business with increased programming. In terms of staffing, our assumption is, as John said, that we'd have a new music director. We figured that at 10 months of the year with a new music director and 2 months of an interim. We're education director, full year, part-time, and the parish administrator, again, we planned for a full year. The salary increase, the vestry approved a 4% increase for our rector, sexton, and finance administrator. The other staff, it doesn't mean that the other staff were recently hired right towards the end of the year. So for instance, the education director, that there was no change to the salary because that was we went with the hiring offer. The music director, again, we're paying an interim person right now. So the people who really saw the 4% increase were the rector, the sexton, and the finance administrator. Parish administrator, again, is a temporary employee, so that was not applied. It is factored into the 2023 budget, though.
Is the parish administrator a part-time or a full-time job?
It's part-time, I believe, right, Beth? It's less than 40 hours a week.
It's yes,
Right.
part-time, part-time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mhm.
Pension and health benefits, really not much change there, except for the new music director. When an offer is made, there'll be pension, but no health benefits because it's reduced, not a full-time position.
Mhm.
So in terms of income, let's start looking at that. Pledges as of January 20th, which is the last update I received, are 338,407. So significantly down from previous years, continuing kind of that trend of fewer pledged units, and lower pledging. Pledges were really kind of the ones that came in were really kind of flat. Not too many people increased their pledges from previous years. The non-pledge, we decided to budget that really aggressively at $60,000. You can see we were almost at $55,000 in 2022. The trend has been for it to go up. There were other years historically where we came close to $50,000 or more. So the vestry felt comfortable putting that target up to $60,000. Plate, we didn't make too much change there from the actual, and other income, again, so a lot of that are the special offerings, and we think we'll see more of that as we kind of normalize our worship experience in 2023. So we ended up with an income budget of $419,000. It's about 9% lower in income than our 2022 budget. Any questions on the income before we go on to expenses? Okay, the expenses, when we originally submitted it, we being the finance committee originally submitted to the vestry, the expenses were a little bit more than this. Our deficit then was quite a bit more. So we went back and made a few small adjustments where we could on the expenses. Kind of the main things to note are the differences are the, staffing and compensation expenses. There's one thing that shows up a little bit later here is that the nursery staff used to, what we pay them used to come out of this wage number. In the 2023 budget, because we pay them differently now, we moved that down into the education program. So you can see that's why it's quite a bit larger than in previous years. So came from wages, moved down into education program. Some of the differences here are inflation as well. That is factored into our office supplies, those kinds of things. Utilities, as John mentioned, those rates are going up, which we all know, we feel that every month. So we've made some adjustment, took that up a little bit as well. Building and grounds, this had been started out originally to be a larger number, and in order to trim the budget somewhat, we basically took it down to just costs of maintenance, slightly a little bit more than that. So what I'm getting at is, as soon as we will not do any big projects that we will pay for out of the operating funds. If some big projects come along, and Phil Einspar and the Building and Grounds Committee do have a list, but most of what's on there can be paid for out of the building fund. Now it will sap the building fund quite a bit, so we may need to take a look at that as we move through the year if our income doesn't increase. But that took quite a big, we took about $10,000 out of that.
Lori, a question about that line item. This is Phil. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, one of them is we had put in an amount placeholder for getting a consultant to help us give an assessment of the building and give us recommendations and perhaps some estimates on
Right.
improvements or repairs. Was that one of the things that had to be taken out?
We didn't take specific items out, Phil. We took just took the number down.
Because it could be somewhat less than the figures that I'd given you, but we still are waiting.
Yeah.
The other thing is some of the I believe it was the air conditioning equipment we got some rebates on, and I assume that was reflected in the actuals. But the thing I had a question about going forward is that we were able to get a low cost or low interest loan from RPU for some of that equipment. Is that payments for that is that included in this line item? The monthly payments against that loan?
No, it doesn't show up in this line item. It's kind of set up in a liability account, which doesn't show up in our this part of our budget.
Okay,
John,
that's
might
fine.
be able to explain that better than I can.
Yeah, and I'd rather than bore the whole group, maybe John and I could talk about it a little bit later
Phil Malley can also explain it as well.
Okay.
Sorry, I just can't repeat.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
But it is accounted for on our balance. If you look at our balance sheet, it's accounted for there.
Yeah, it's a balance sheet transaction, and it's basically exchanging cash for a payment on the loan. So it all takes place in the balance sheet. It's not an expense the way we would see an expense in our general operations fund per se. It's just it's a repayment of a loan.
Yeah, so that liability is carried in that other place.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Music, just of note, we added a little bit in there because we generally have expenses related to the director of music search. Church programs were up, but up kind of a reasonable amount, if you will. And Altar Guild, Dane's expenses have gone up, so that's reflected there. The Oasis Garden is actually down. This is Joan Raby's estimate, and she's usually really spot on because she gives me a very itemized estimate. And there are a number of things that are either going to, they aren't going to cost less, but I can't remember specifically what it is, but she's got a grant that comes in, and there's something that's going to be donated by Mayo. So that's down this year. The diocesan share is still 13%, but because we had lower income last year, it's a little bit less than what we've paid in the past. So all told, our expenses come in at about $500,000. And our very sobering deficit shortfall then is $81,643.
And just a little bit of commentary on a couple things there. We'll have a chance to revisit these as well in the next couple of pages. But the diocesan payments, we have an option to appeal to the diocese to reduce those. And I want to make it clear that we talked about that as a finance committee. Beth brought it up. We talked about it as a committee, and we concluded that at this point in time, we're not prepared to move forward with something like that. The way it works is we get a 1 year reduction, maybe a couple of years. I don't know what the time period is, but it's not a forgiveness, it's a loan. So you basically have to, you'd be expected to reimburse the diocese in the future when things turn more positive for the parish. And so we thought, well, we can do it. We'd really be pushed to the edge, I think, before we would exercise that option, is the way we concluded it as a finance committee and made that recommendation going to the vestry and to the wardens and to Beth. As far as the amount of the deficit, it's a big number. We do have some funds available that are held in contingency, that if need be, we can reach into those contingencies and potentially move money into the general fund and mitigate that deficit. But we felt that at this point in the year, once again, we're in January, we've barely gotten going. We're not going to recommend that at this point in time, but that is an option. The vestry can elect to do that during the year if they need to. So
I'll also mention that when the vestry saw this and saw this number, you'll hear more about this in the annual meeting, in Beth's report and in the vestry's report. But they really saw it more, rather than being discouraged by it, they saw it more as a call to action.
right.
And that's why we did not build in planned use of any of our contingency, because the vestry wanted to see what we could do to mitigate it without having to dip into those. Again, kind of broadly, I'll say a call to action, and there'll be that, how that actually, what that actually ends up being will be seen, but you'll hear a little bit about it at the annual meeting. Okay, this is just a little bit different look at it. The green bar is the 2022 budget, the blue bar is 2022 actual, and the yellow is 2023 budget. So you can see visually kind of how it compares there. Like we've said, the income is largely due to pledge income dropping, non-pledge is going up. The result is, as John puts it so well, the result is uncertainty.
Mhm.
I put it more as the result is Beth and I have white hair, but if we didn't already have white hair, we'd have white hair now. The non-pledge again continues to trend upward. Plate is about stable, and other income is up from last year a little bit, but down from previous years because our building use has gone down. In terms of expenses, again, drop in 2022 because of staffing and staff changes and staff vacancies. The other one to show here is the building and grounds, like we talked about it. We trimmed that down to kind of a maintenance only budget that excludes the special projects. And then here's where you can kind of visually see that the program budget is up because we're returning to more normal operations and more normal programming, which is exciting. This is just shows you, summarizes some of the key variance drivers. Most of these we've talked about. Let me see if there's any that I want to pull out here. Really, most of these, it provides just a little more detail line item by line item, but most of these we've really kind of talked about. I'd be happy to take any questions on this slide or any of the, this is my last slide, so I'll happy to take questions on this or any of the others that we've looked at. All right, John, I will turn it over to you to wrap us up here.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Yeah, good job. Thank you very much for that nice summary. I would characterize, and I've been around this stuff for a long time. Many of you know I've been in church parish leadership since the late 1970s. Will you believe that? Yes, right. And first elected as a vestry in '79. I would characterize Calvary in a stable recovery mode. Now, what does that mean? Well, we've got the investment portfolio behind us, something many parishes don't have, or they're spending it to survive. And that we're not anywhere near that at this point, thank the Lord. But we've got the investment portfolio that gives us kind of a stable base financially that we can work from. And it's by the grace of people who've gone before us and made donations to the parish for that purpose, and other reasons why we've got that portfolio, and it's a real blessing. The beginning balance for the year was about 656,000. Now it's down to about 648 or 49. That's a 1% reduction. That's a little bit misleading because a lot of our investment portfolio is in cash and cash equivalents that are zero risk. 60% is in those type of investments, whereas 40% are in investments that are considered at risk with a much higher potential for earnings but a higher risk level as well. And those are the ones that if you've looked at your own portfolio, you've probably seen some downward trends in some of those investments over the year, and not unexpected given where the market's gone. And chances are very good that, and Christy can speak to this specifically, but we'll probably see the market move back up again within a few years or so. It's all speculative, of course, but that's been the trend, the historical trends over the years. Christy, you want to comment on the investment portfolio at all, since you are on the call?
Sure, John. Yeah, we stick very closely to our discipline of 60% in the cash equivalents, 40% is invested in the market. And so obviously in a down market that has protected us a little bit. But we look at those investments once a year and make rebalances as needed, but it's not something that we're trying to time the market, and we're not actively trading or anything crazy like that. We have just a very disciplined portfolio of exchange traded funds that match the overall market, and we have exposure to large companies, small companies, international, and a little bit of real estate. So we just stick to our discipline, and we're in that for the long term with that with the money that we have in the market. But it's nice now that we are seeing some interest rates finally back with the cash That's the 60%, because as you all know, that has been pretty much non-existent for several years. And so at least we're earning some interest now on that 60% in the cash equivalents.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll have all the details, so a much higher level of detail in the annual report, and talk about it some more again a week from today. But because this is a very important part of our responsibilities as a finance committee and as a vestry, there's a level of fiduciary duty there that goes with those roles in the parish, and part of that fiduciary duty is around the investment portfolio as well. Some of these things we've already talked about. I'm not going to be redundant here, but just to stress that the drop in income we've seen in 2023, pledging income particularly, is a problem and an opportunity. And as Lori mentioned, it's an opportunity to really increase our focus on pledging and stewardship as a priority in the parish. They already are, but maybe some more of that. Maybe year-round stewardship, and whatever that looks like and means. I think there's some ideas floating around on that, but that's going to receive a much higher level of attention now than it has in past years. We're going to need that multi-year plan. I mean, if this were my operation and I were the CFO, I would say to my team, you got to have a plan. You got to have a strategic plan that will move this parish from a deficit mode to a surplus mode within a certain period of time. And I don't know what that looks like at this point. There's going to be all kinds of revenue ideas or income ideas and expense ideas that can move us toward that place. But a deficit like we were seeing in 2023 is not sustainable, and that's just a full stop. It's an opportunity, but it's also a deficit that has to be addressed because it isn't sustainable. Other financial incentives that initiatives we're going to be looking at in 2023. We've been talking about a capital campaign, Friends of Calvary. The problem is it takes time and resources to get one established, and frankly, I'm not going to blame it on the pandemic like that's tempting to do, but there's clearly has been a delay in some of these ideas when it comes to turning them into real program, and that's just the way it is. So, but that once again will be an item for discussion in 2023. That about wraps up what I've got to say. I want to thank everybody for participating, and we'll take some more questions if you have any. If you have any questions after we're done here and something comes to mind you want to have answered, shoot me an email or Lori an email or call us up, whatever. Call Beth at church, whatever is easiest for you, and we'll get you answers. So
I want to add to what Lori, John, and Chrissy have said, that at the vestry meeting this past Wednesday night, this concept of this call that I'll be making in my address to for the vestry to do this financial planning and some other things that I'm going to ask them to do, which will meet one of the areas of focus that the vestry is going to be showing the congregation on Sunday. But the energy that John said, a problem and a challenge, I would say, sometimes in a church setting, it takes a crisis for people to get engaged, because things kind of tick along and we're all trying to still get our heads around, is it really 2023 in the last 2 years? And all the above. We have more people in our congregation that are now retired. This past year, we had a surprising number of people in my generation who retired. And more and more people on fixed income but we also have new people who have joined the church just in the last few months. Some young people, some young couples and singles, and we had several young people this morning, surprisingly, at the 8:30 service. So the ideas started to flow at the end, and Lori can speak to this too, at the end of that vestry meeting. From the energy just was out of the, would almost blew the roof off. Half the vestry was there in person and half were on Zoom. But I left that vestry meeting incredibly optimistic about people getting engaged in this problem. And also I've talked to a couple of our little stewardship team. Colleen is on the call. There are a handful of people who are regular pledgers who did not pledge this year
Right.
yet, but they're around. They're members of Calvary. They haven't gone anywhere. And so, but the amount of money that they normally would pledge and have not yet pledged is a significant amount of money when you put it up over and against this deficit. So there's going to be some direct asks and direct conversations with the right people with these folks, I think, because I think people need to know that what they give really, really does matter. And it doesn't matter really that you give a ton of money, but that you just give something. We had, as we talked about the vestry, some folks who have moved out of Minnesota who were significant pledgers. And that goes, thank you, Lori, that goes to the plan that this happens every year. And I think it was John Winter who said that to me a few years ago. Every year in a church, people die and people move. I mean, that happens every year. But without a plan, then you're all of a sudden caught with a significant reduction when a really generous pledger retires and moves. And so there's no way to make that up because it takes a while for new people to get their pledges going and understand what it's all about. You know, if you've been involved in stewardship for any length of time, you know that. But I want to make it clear to y'all who took the time to come tonight. Thank you for that 45 minutes of your life on a Sunday evening, that this ending of that meeting was enormously energizing and optimistic. There were simple ideas that came up, but the big sort of what I heard from the vestry was, Lori got shut out of the meeting. That what I heard was a vestry, and then we have new vestry members who will be coming in. Absolutely, everybody is completely committed to Calvary. And there are people who come with different ideas and different ways of solving problems and, you know, all the above. And we have a generally speaking, a vestry right now with a lot of adults with kids, and they're busy, but they show up. A lot of times they have to show up on Zoom, but they do. And they spent a significant amount of time with Lori and with John looking at this picture. So I don't want you to leave feeling, oh, that is not how I feel, white hair or not. I don't feel that way. I of course I get the balcony. I'll get the balcony view, right? I see the whole picture, as does some of the vestry see the whole picture. And so that, yeah, I'm repeating myself now, but I just wanted to say that because, you know, it is a challenge, but I know Calvary can meet it. I have absolute faith, and that this congregation is going to be wanting to get really involved in how we live our next several years together in this congregation. I've seen it happen already, and people getting involved in things that are new to them. And having Michelle McKean give this brunch this morning for a dozen or so parents that showed up, and more came, and a couple forgot. We had a lot of kids in church. So there's just a lot of really energizing and hopeful. Ellen Youngers knows this too, with children at Calvary. So I said this in a sermon a couple of weeks ago. I feel like we're coming back to ourselves. That's kind of the phrase that popped into my mind. We're coming back to ourselves. And that's
I'd like just to interrupt here a second and just say thank you to everybody who set this up and gathered the information and badgered those of us on committees to make sure we gave you the information. Very concise, clear view of where we're at, and I totally am behind all the decisions that are incorporated into the expenses and so forth for next year.
Thanks, Phil. I echo
Thanks,
that.
Phil.
We'll thank them again on Sunday. That Lori has been our co-treasurer with Christy now for 3 years, I think it is now, and most of which was in a pandemic. So God bless her. And she is going to be not our co-treasurer next year, but Darren Cooper is going to be our co-treasurer with Christy next year, and John will stick around as our finance chair. And Lori, I kind of heard you infer that you might stick around on the finance committee. So I don't want to speak for you, but I did kind of hear, maybe you misspoke on that, but
I'm not sure that's a choice, is it? I'm not.
Did you hear it in the cloud? Did you hear it in the cloud or
no, I
something?
think you said it at the vestry meeting. Well, we on the finance committee will be coming back to you in February. And I was like, oh, ding, ding, ding. So
That's pretty clear.
Yeah, that's what I heard anyway. That's what God spoke to me, and that's what God said.
We'll see if John and Tom and Christy can stand another year of me on the finance.
Well, if there are no other questions, are there any other questions? I know people want to get back to their suppers and whatever else they've got planned. Any other comments?
I don't have a question. I just have a wild thing that I want to end with. Young people, bring your children. You're strong enough to work if you're still, strapped financially because you're trying to save for college for these children. The other big moneymaker that was once upon a time, and I'm going to say it, is bring back fruitcake. I mean,
well, yeah, I'm going to interrupt you, Dane, because we have talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think we can bring back fruitcake, but because of just the logistics of that, but the vestry really has started tackling which is people talking about this since I first came to Calvary, how to bring our congregation together for this unified action the fruitcake project provided. And also I'll say it again, and Tom Apps can back me up on this, because I don't think it sinks through to people that the fruitcake year contributed between $14,000 and $15,000 to the Calvary.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
that funded the kitchen, and then the rest of the money went into operating. So that is a tangible, real-time issue that has affected our budget. I mean, it wouldn't make up this deficit, obviously, but so that idea of the metaphorically,
Yeah, it's like a bake sale at a larger way.
Yeah. So you're being heard loud and clear. I just want to make sure you heard that, even if I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, I brought it up as well the other day on the call.
Several people have.
Yeah.
Right.
Several people. All right, my friends, I'm gonna
thank you very much.
stop recording, and hopefully this saved. I'll never know.